Hello, everybody. Today we'll speak about the terrifying event which took place 75 years ago, the Second World War. We respect those heroes and conquerors. Thanks to Soviet army and allied forces, people all over the world now can live without horrible legacy of Nazi dictatorship. They sacrificed their lives so that we may live ours. How did it happen? Let's look at history. The instability created in Europe by the First World War 1914-18 set the stage for another international conflict, World War II, which broke out 2 decades later and would prove even more devastating. Rising to power in an economically and politically unstable Germany, Adolf Hitler and his National Socialist Nazi Party rearmed the nation and signed strategic treaties with Italy and Japan to further his ambition of world domination. Hitler's invasion of Poland in September 1939 drove Great Britain and France to declare war on Germany, and World War II had begun. Over the next 6 years, the conflict would take more lives and destroy more land and property around the globe than any previous war. Among the estimated 45-60 million people killed were 6 million Jews murdered in Nazi concentration camps as part of Hitler's diabolical final solution, now known as the Holocaust. Leading up to World War II, the devastation of the Great War, as World War I was known at the time, had greatly destabilized Europe, and in many respects World War II grew out of issues left unresolved by that earlier conflict. In particular, political and economic instability in Germany and lingering resentment over the harsh terms imposed by the Versailles Treaty fueled the rise to power of Adolf Hitler and his National Socialist Party. After becoming Reich Chancellor in 1933, Hitler swiftly consolidated power, anointing himself Führer, supreme leader, in 1934. Obsessed with the idea of the superiority of the pure German race, which he called Aryan, Hitler believed that war was the only way to gain the necessary Lebensraum of living space for that race to expand. In the mid-1930s, he began the rearmament of Germany, secretly and violation of the Versailles Treaty. After signing alliances with Italy and Japan against the Soviet Union, Hitler sent troops to occupy Austria in 1938, and the following year annexed Czechoslovakia. Hitler's open aggression went unchecked, as the United States and Soviet Union were concentrated on internal politics at the time, and neither France nor Britain, their 2 other nations most devastated by the Great War, were eager for confrontation as well. Outbreak of World War II, 1939. In late August 1939, Hitler and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin signed the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, which incited a frenzy of war in London and Paris. Hitler had long planned an invasion of Poland, and nation to which Great Britain and France had guaranteed military support if it was attacked by Germany. The pact with Stalin meant that Hitler would not face a war on 2 fronts. Once he invaded Poland, he would have Soviet assistance in conquering and dividing the nation itself. On September 1, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland from the west. 2 days later, France and Britain declared war on Germany, beginning World War II. Winston Churchill first speech as Prime Minister, House of Commons, 13 May 1940. I would say to the House, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror, victory however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival. World War II in the West, 1940-41. On April 9, 1940, Germany simultaneously invaded Norway and occupied Denmark, and the war began in earnest. On May 10, German force swept through Belgium and the Netherlands in what became known as Blitzkrieg or Lightning War. On June 14, German forces entered Paris. A new government formed. Marshal Philippe Pétain, France hero of World War I, requested the armistice 2 nights later. France was divided into 2 zones, one under German military occupation and the other Pétain's government, installed as Vichy France. Hitler now turned his attention to Britain, which the defensive advantage of being separated from the continent by the English Channel. Operation Barbarossa. By early 1941, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria had joined the Axis, and German troops overran Yugoslavia and Greece that April. Hitler's conquest of the Balkans was a precursor for his real objective, an invasion of the Soviet Union, whose vast territory would give the German master race the Bundesraum it needed. The other half of Hitler's strategy was the extermination of the Jews from throughout German-occupied Europe. Plans for the final solution were introduced among the time of the Soviet offensive, and over the next 3 years more than 4 million Jews would perish in the death camps established in occupied Poland. On June 22, 1941, Hitler ordered the invasion of the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. Though Soviet tanks and aircraft greatly outnumbered the Germans, their air technology was largely obsolete, and the impact of the surprise invasion helped Germans get within 200 miles of Moscow by mid-July. Arguments between Hitler and his commanders delayed the next German advance until October, when it was stalled by Soviet counteroffensive and the onset of harsh winter weather. Let's watch a video.
сопротивление бессмысленно. Давайте! Всякое сопротивление бессмысленно. Давайте!
So, it was a complete horror. World War II in the Pacific, 1941-43. With Britain facing Germany in Europe, the United States was the only nation capable of combating Japanese aggression, which by late 1941 included an expansion of its ongoing war with China and the seizure of European colonial holdings in the Far East. On December 7, 1941, 360 Japanese aircraft attacked the major United States naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, taking the Americans completely by surprise and claiming the lives of more than 2,300 troops. After a long string of Japanese victories, the United States Pacific Fleet won the Battle of Midway in June 1942, which proved to be a turning point in the war. In North Africa, British and American forces had defeated the Italians and Germans by 1943. Allied invasion of Sicily and Italy followed, and Mussolini's government fell in July 1943, though Allied fighting against the German in Italy would continue until 1945. On the world's War's II Eastern Front, the Soviet counteroffensive launched in November 1942 ended the bloody Battle of Stalingrad, which had seen some of the fiercest combats of the war. The approach of winter, along with food and medical supplies, spelled the end of German troops there, and the last of them surrendered on January 31, 1943. On June 6, 1944, celebrated as D-Day, the Allies began a massive invasion of Europe, landing 156,000 British, Canadian, and American soldiers on the beaches of Normandy and France. In response, Hitler poured all the remaining strength of his army into Western Europe, ensuring Germany's defeat in the East. Soviet troops soon advanced into Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania, while Hitler gathered his forces to drive the Americans and British back from Germany in the Battle of Bulge, December 1944, January 1945, the last major German offensive of the war. So, one video.
Get on with the war. But now the war was with winter as well as with the Germans. For the fighting soldier, times when the other, warmer Far East war seemed almost attractive. From the Dutch coast to the Alps, frost, snow, and ice-bound roads. Somehow on these roads must be carried every shell and bullet, every can of fuel, every mouthful of rations, every long-awaited cigarette. And as for the really heavy stuff, lethal weapons, now lethal in a new way. On the airfields, skis, a constant fight to keep planes skyworthy, for when the mists might disperse. But just the weather that one guy had been waiting for. Just the weather to ground the Allied planes and allow Hitler to launch his long-planned counterattack. That counterattack of which the Allies never believed him capable. December 1944, Ardennes. Allied transport burning on the mist-bound roads. In the ditches, outnumbered Americans seeking to evade the gray host that has come upon them, unexpectedly out of the fog. In the rocky wooded Ardennes, weakly held, heavy new Tiger tanks forced their way through the Allied line on the same battlefield as the German success of May 1940. With this surprise, the enemy hopes for a real breakthrough, a drive even as far as Antwerp to slice the Allied armies into two. A last gamble, all or nothing. But even after the shock on the Allied side, there is enough strength to contain the swelling bulge of the enemy penetration. To the commanders in the field, the German stroke causes anxiety. But it is anxiety tempered by the knowledge that the further the chicken sticks his neck out, the easier it will be to chop it off. Bastogne, deep in the bulge. There, an elated enemy awaits the fall of this vital road junction. How good it is to be advancing again. Have a captured American cigarette or cigar. Now fall, Bastogne. But obstinately, Bastogne refuses to fall. Though hard-pressed and short of supplies, its American defenders are determined to hold out, even though surrounded. To a demand to surrender, their commander replies, "Nuts." Then to their aid, a change in the weather. Airborne again, the Allied air fleets use their sky to full advantage. Down to besieged Bastogne go supplies and ammunition from scores of transports. At the same time, down onto the enemy supply lines go cascades of bombs and streams of cannon fire. Short of everything, and with Bastogne a lead weight across their communications, the German spearheads grind to a halt above the Meuse Valley. Unable to advance further, they take shelter from the Allied guns. The situation, they feel, is tough, though far from desperate. Soon supplies will come up. Soon a loophole in the Allied line will be found. It'll be all right. It has to be. Then, on the morning of New Year's Day, the Luftwaffe appears in strength for the first time since anyone can remember. Throughout Belgium, it cracks down to destroy Allied aircraft as they lie parked on the fields. From the ground, gunners and airmen fight back. Everywhere where they can get off the ground, Allied fighters rise to join battle with the German intruders. To the Allies, the Battle of New Year's Day comes as a complete surprise. Everywhere, black, smoking shells of aircraft are proof of the effectiveness of the attack. But before they can regain their bases, the German pilots are pounced on by scores of avenging British and American fighters. Over snowy fields, fighter by fighter, Goering's long-harbored air strength falls out of the wintry sky. Meanwhile, in the Ardennes, the Americans have recaptured the initiative, moving step by step back over the lost ground. Battered and squeezed from three sides, the Germans begin to turn back, seek ways of getting out, then finally run. Hitler's counteroffensive is over, and he has won neither time nor relief. the army will continue to fight on. But for the Luftwaffe, the twilight of the gods.
World War II ends 1945. At the Potsdam Conference, July-August 1945, US President Harry S. Truman, who had taken office after Roosevelt's death in April, Churchill and Stalin discussed the ongoing war with Japan as well as the peace settlement with Germany. Post-war Germany would be divided into 4 occupation zones to be controlled by the Soviet Union, Britain, the United States, and France. On the divisive matter of Eastern Europe's future, Churchill and Truman acquiesced to Stalin as they needed Soviet cooperation in the war against Japan. So let's watch the final video.
Throughout the world, throngs of people hail the end of the war in Europe. It is 5 years and more since Hitler marched into Poland. Years full of suffering and death and sacrifice. Now the war against Germany is won. A grateful nation gives thanks for victory. Hundreds of thousands crowd into American churches to give thanks to God. President Truman announced the official surrender.
This is a solemn but glorious hour. I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe. For this victory, we join in offering our thanks to the Providence which has guided and sustained us through the dark days of adversity and into light. Much remains to be done. The victory won in the West must now be won in the East. The whole world must be cleansed of the evil from which half the world has been free. United, the peace-loving nations have demonstrated in the West that their arms are stronger by far than the might of dictators or the tyranny of military cliques that once called us soft and weak. The power of our people to defend themselves against all enemies will be proved in the Pacific War as it was proved in Europe.
Historic pictures of the last days of the war in Europe show American and Russian troops as they joined at Torgau on the River Elbe, splitting German armies in two. United States General Reinhardt meets Red Army General Rusakov, a meeting that spelled out certain German defeat. At Allied Mediterranean headquarters in Italy, the Germans unconditionally give up all of Italy and southern Austria. In civilian clothes, representatives of the German armies signed the surrender document. General W.D. Morgan, representing Supreme Mediterranean Commander Alexander, signs for the Allies. Preceding the final capitulation at Reims, this surrender eliminated 1 million German troops. Inside Germany itself, the Allies seized the famous Stadium of Nuremberg, scene of countless Nazi Party rallies. With the capture of this famous southern German city, the American flag flouts out the swastika. In a symbolic gesture, American troops destroy the Nazi Party emblem.
So thank you very much for your attention. And final thing that I want to say, remember, we're proud and we honor your sacrifice and heroism. So once again, thanks to Soviet Army and Allied forces that now we can live in a free world. So, and you have to remember it as well. Don't forget heroes. Goodbye.